pressed his palm against the cool wall of his cell and counted. 8 months, 12 days, and roughly 6 hours since he had last seen Earth's sky. The walls around him glowed with a soft purple light that never quite went away, making it hard to tell day from night. He had learned to sleep anyway. Humans could adapt to almost anything if they tried hard enough. The cell was not terrible. It had a bed that adjusted to his body, a waste disposal system he had finally figured out after 2 embarrassing weeks, and a small desk where he kept his notes. The Empire did not believe in torture. They simply believed in keeping him away from everyone else, like a strange animal in a zoo that nobody quite knew what to do with. Had been back on Earth. He studied alien life forms and tried to understand how different species communicated. When Earth made first contact with the Empire, they needed people who understood biology and culture, had volunteered immediately. His mother had cried. His father had been proud. His younger sister had called him an idiot for leaving a safe job to fly across the galaxy. Maybe she had been right. The diplomatic mission had gone wrong almost immediately. During a formal dinner, one of the human ambassadors had reached across the table to pass bread to an official. It was a normal gesture on Earth, meant to be friendly. But in culture, reaching over someone's plate was like spitting in their face. The insult had been massive. Within hours, all the humans were arrested. Most of them were sent home after 3 weeks of questioning and tense negotiations, but had been kept behind. They were curious about him. He spoke 4 Earth languages and had learned basic during the flight. He understood alien biology better than anyone else on the team, so they decided he would stay as a cultural specimen to help them understand humanity. That had been 8 months ago. Spent his days writing observations about society based on what little he could see and hear. The guards who brought his food were always different, probably to prevent him from forming relationships. Through the small window in his door, he could see a corridor that glowed with the same purple light. Sometimes he heard footsteps. Sometimes he heard music that sounded like wind chimes mixed with whale song. Mostly he heard silence. He exercised to stay sane. Push-ups in the morning, squats in the afternoon, meditation before sleep. He recited poetry he had memorized as a child. He thought about his family and wondered if they knew he was still alive. He tried very hard not to think about spending the rest of his life in this room. On the 252nd day of his imprisonment, something changed. Was doing push-ups when he heard a sound in the corridor. It was different from the usual footsteps of guards or the humming of the building systems. This was a soft chirping noise, like a bird that was scared or hurt. He stopped exercising and moved to the door, pressing his ear against it. The chirping continued, growing closer. Then there was a bang like something had fallen. More chirping, higher pitched now, definitely distressed. Stepped back as the door suddenly opened. A guard stood there with his food tray, looking annoyed. The guard placed the tray on the floor and turned to leave. As he did, something small and fast darted between his legs and into the cell. The guard cursed in and reached for the creature but had already closed the distance. "Wait," he said in careful, "let me help. I study animals. I can catch it safely." The guard hesitated. He looked at the small creature now hiding under his bed, then back at the creature. Finally, he nodded. 5 minutes. If you cannot catch it, I call for backup." He stepped outside and sealed the door. Knelt down slowly and looked under the bed. 2 large eyes stared back at him from the darkness. The creature was small, about the size of a human toddler. Its skin was translucent and could see patterns of light moving underneath like bioluminescent fish in deep oceans. It had 4 delicate limbs and something that looked like small wings or fins on its back. One of the wings was damaged. Could see a tear in the thin membrane with dark fluid leaking from it. "Hey there," said softly in Korean, then switched to, "I am not going to hurt you. You are injured, let me help." The creature made a small chirping sound. Its eyes were incredibly large and intelligent, watching every movement. Slowly, carefully, extended his hand palm up, the universal gesture of peace he hoped worked across species. The creature tilted its head. The lights under its skin pulsed in waves of blue and green. After what felt like forever, it crept forward slightly. Did not move, he barely breathed. His leg was cramping from kneeling, but he ignored it. The creature came a little closer, then a little more. Finally, it touched his hand with one small limb. The skin was cool and smooth, like touching silk that had been left in the shade. The creature chirped again, softer this time. Slowly curled his fingers, not grabbing, just providing support. The creature climbed onto his hand. "Good," whispered. "Very good, now let me look at that wing." He brought the creature to his desk where the light was better. The injury was definitely bad. The membrane was torn and the dark fluid was still seeping out. Knew he had to stop the bleeding, but he had nothing medical in his cell. He thought fast. His shirt. It was made of cotton, a natural fiber. He tore a strip from the bottom and examined it. Cotton was absorbent and relatively clean. It would have to do. He took another strip and dipped it in his water cup, then gently cleaned around the wound. The creature flinched but did not pull away. It watched him with those huge eyes, making soft chirping noises. "I know it hurts," said gently, "but this will help, trust me." He used the dry strip to carefully wrap the damaged wing, securing it but not too tight. The creature's chirping changed tone, becoming almost musical. The lights under its skin shifted to warmer colors, oranges and yellows. When finished, the creature climbed up his arm and perched on his shoulder. It nuzzled against his neck, making contented sounds. Smiled for the first time in months. Then he heard the door opening again. Multiple guards rushed in, followed by someone in elaborate armor. They were all pointing weapons at him. The small creature on his shoulder made a frightened sound and pressed closer too. "Step away from the air," the armored figure shouted. "Step away now or you will die." His blood turned cold. The air. This small, injured creature was royalty. Before he could respond, the guards grabbed him. The creature cried out, its chirps becoming screams. Tried to explain, tried to show them the bandage, tried to make them understand. But they were not listening. They pulled him away as the creature reached for him with its small limbs, lights flashing desperately under its skin. Was dragged out of his cell and down the corridor. He could hear the creature's cries echoing behind him, growing fainter. His mind raced. He had touched a royal child without permission. In his cultural studies, he had read that this was a severe crime in society. They were going to execute him. The guards pulled him through doorway after doorway, up ramps and across bridges that floated in the air with no visible support. Finally, they reached a massive set of doors that rose up into darkness. The doors opened slowly, revealing a chamber so vast that could not see the ceiling. The throne room. He was being taken to the throne room. As the guards pushed him forward, saw hundreds of standing in rows, all watching him. At the far end, on a throne made of crystal that seemed to grow from the floor itself, sat a figure radiating authority and cold anger. Queen Ara, the ruler of the empire. And knew his life had just become much more complicated. Part 2, The Court of Thorns. The throne room was nothing like anything had ever seen. The walls were made of crystal that shifted colors as he watched, moving from deep purple to blue to green like an oil slick in sunlight. Platforms floated at different heights throughout the chamber with no visible support, each one holding clusters of nobles dressed in elaborate robes that seemed to be made of liquid metal. The air itself hummed with a low frequency that could feel in his bones. But what captured his attention most was the silence. Hundreds of beings filled the vast space, yet nobody made a sound. They simply stared at him with eyes that reflected the crystalline light, their faces unreadable. The guards forced to his knees in the center of the chamber. The floor beneath him was cold and smooth. He could see his reflection in it, distorted and strange. He looked up slowly, following the path of crystal steps that led to the throne. Queen Ara sat perfectly still. She was larger than the other, nearly 7 feet tall even seated. Her skin had deeper colors beneath its surface, patterns that swirled like galaxies. She wore no crown, but power radiated from her like heat from a fire. Her eyes, large and dark, fixed on with an intensity that made him want to look away. He forced himself to meet her gaze. A figure stepped forward from beside the throne. This wore armor that seemed to be made of the same crystal as the walls, and it reflected the light in sharp, aggressive angles. His skin patterns pulsed in reds and oranges, colors had learned meant anger or aggression. "I am Commander, Shield of the Empire," the figure announced in. A small device attached to collar translated the words into Korean a moment later. "You stand accused of the highest crime. You have touched the royal heir prince without permission. You have caused injury to him. You have attempted to manipulate him for your own purposes." His mouth went dry. "I did not know," he started, but Commander raised a hand and his voice cut off. Something in the air had changed, pressing against his throat. "You will speak only when the Queen permits it," said coldly. "The evidence is clear. The prince was found in your cell, injured and in your possession. Under law, the penalty for harming a member of the royal family is death. The method of execution is chosen by the victim's closest relative." He turned to Queen Ara and bowed. "Your Majesty, what is your judgment?" The Queen did not respond immediately. She continued to study as if he were a specimen under a microscope. The silence stretched until thought he might scream just to break it. Finally, she spoke. "Let the human speak." Her voice was like music played on instruments had never heard. The translation device struggled to capture all the nuances. "I would hear his version of these events." The pressure on his throat released. He gasped for air and then forced himself to speak clearly. "Your Majesty, I meant no harm. I did not know the child was Prince. I did not even know it was a child at first. I thought it was an animal that had wandered into my cell by accident." Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles. Commander's skin patterns flared brighter red. "You dare to compare the heir to an animal?" "No," said quickly. "Please let me explain. The prince came into my cell while a guard was delivering food. He was already injured. I could see his wing was torn and bleeding. I am a biologist. My job is to help living things. I used what little I had to bandage the wound and stop the bleeding. I gave him water. That is all I did." "Lies," spat. "The prince would never enter a prisoner's cell. He is well guarded at all times. You somehow lured him there. You injured him to make yourself seem like a rescuer. This is a human trick, is it not? To cause harm and then pretend to fix it so that the victim feels grateful." "No," protested. "That is not what happened, I swear it." "The word of a human means nothing," continued. He turned to address the entire court now. "Let us not forget what humans are. Their planet is by endless wars. They poison their own air and water. They cannot even unite their own species, yet they presume to travel the stars and interact with civilized beings. They are violent, primitive, and dangerous." Many of the assembled nobles made sounds of agreement, a rustling like wind through leaves. Felt his stomach twist. Everything said was technically true. Earth did have a terrible history of violence and environmental damage. Humans were newcomers to space travel compared to species like the who had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. But that did not make all humans evil or dangerous. "Your Majesty," said, speaking directly to the Queen and ignoring. "I understand your people see humans as primitive. Maybe we are. But there are some things that do not change between species. A child was hurt. I helped. That is all. I did not know he was a prince. I did not know I was breaking any laws. I simply saw a living being in pain, and I did what I could to ease that pain." Queen Ara tilted her head slightly. "And if you had known he was the heir, would you have acted differently?" Thought about lying. He thought about saying yes. He would have been more careful, more respectful. But something told him that the Queen would see through any lie he told. So he answered truthfully. "No, Your Majesty. If anything, knowing he was important would have made me try even harder to help him. A prince needs care as much as any other child, maybe more because he has fewer people he can truly trust. The queen's eyes widened slightly. It was the first change in her expression since had entered the room. Around them, the murmuring grew louder. Commander looked like he wanted to strike down where he knelt. "Enough," the queen said softly, but her voice carried to every corner of the vast chamber. Silence fell instantly. "Commander, bring me the physician who examined my son. I would hear the medical assessment." Looked like he wanted to argue, but he bowed stiffly and gestured to someone in the crowd. A smaller stepped forward, wearing robes marked with symbols recognized as medical insignia. This one had skin patterns that moved in calm, gentle waves of green and blue. "I am chief physician of the royal household," the said, bowing to the queen. "I examined Prince immediately after he was removed from the prisoner's cell." "And what did you find?" the queen asked. Hesitated, glancing at Commander before speaking. "The prince had a torn wing membrane, Your Majesty. The injury was approximately 3 hours old based on the coagulation of the blood. It appeared to be caused by catching the wing on a sharp edge, possibly during play or exploration." "Was the human responsible for this injury?" "No, Your Majesty. The angle and nature of the tear make it impossible for it to have been caused by humanoid hands. Additionally," paused again, "the wound had been treated. Crude bandaging was applied using plant fiber material. The fiber had natural antibacterial properties that we do not commonly use in medicine. It prevented what would have been a severe infection." The murmuring in the court grew louder. Saw several nobles leaning toward each other, their skin patterns flashing in rapid communication he could not interpret. "Are you saying," the queen said slowly, "that the human's treatment saved my son from infection?" "Yes, Your Majesty. Without treatment, the prince would have developed systemic infection within 6 to 8 hours. The human's intuitive care was effective, surprisingly so." Commander stepped forward. "This proves nothing. The human could have planned this, could have caused the initial injury, knowing he could then treat it and gain favor." "That is impossible," said firmly. "The injury occurred in the royal wing of the palace, nowhere near the detention level. The prince would have had to travel significant distance while injured to reach the prisoner's cell. And may I add, Your Majesty, that I examined the prince's skin patterns during the treatment. His bioluminescence showed no signs of fear or distress while in the human's presence. In fact, his patterns indicated comfort and trust." The queen stood. Every eye in the chamber turned to her. She descended the crystal steps slowly, each footfall making a soft chiming sound. She walked across the chamber floor until she stood directly before. "Look at me, human," she commanded. Raised his eyes. Up close, he could see that the queen's face carried the weight of immense sadness beneath its authority. Her skin patterns, which had seemed so controlled from a distance, flickered occasionally with darker colors. "My mate was killed 6 months ago," she said quietly, though her voice still carried throughout the chamber. "An assassination attempt meant for me. Since then, my son has been guarded every moment. Yet somehow he escaped his guards and found his way to you. Why?" "I do not know, Your Majesty," said honestly. "I can only guess that he was curious, or perhaps he was scared after being hurt, and he ran until he found somewhere that seemed safe." "Safe," the queen repeated. "He felt safe with you, a human, a prisoner, a stranger from a violent species." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned to address the court. "I will consider this matter. The human will be returned to his cell while I deliberate his fate. Commander, ensure he is guarded but not harmed, and find out how my son bypassed an entire wing of security." She returned to her throne and was pulled to his feet by the guards. As they led him from the chamber, he caught a glimpse of physician watching him with an expression he could not quite read. Back in his cell, sat on his bed and put his head in his hands. He had no idea if he had helped his case or made it worse, but at least he was still alive. For now. Part 3. The Prince's Choice. 3 weeks passed and did not die. That was the first surprise. The second surprise was that his cell had changed. The small, dim room he had lived in for 8 months was now a larger suite with 3 rooms. One for sleeping, one for eating, and one with something that looked like a desk and shelves filled with data tablets. A guard brought him food 3 times a day, always different guards, but now they nodded to him politely instead of just shoving the tray through the door. One of them even asked if the temperature was comfortable. Had been so shocked he could only nod. The data tablets were the biggest mystery. They contained information about culture, history, art, and social customs. Spent hours reading them, his mind hungry for knowledge after so many months of isolation. He learned that they had achieved space travel 3,000 years before humans had even invented writing. He learned about their complex family structures, their philosophy of controlled emotion, their belief that civilization required the suppression of chaos. Most importantly, he learned about children. The information fascinated and terrified him in equal measure. Young went through something called the luminescence phase between ages 3 and 5. During this time, their skin patterns were not yet fully under their control. Instead, the patterns responded automatically to emotions and environmental stimuli. It was also during this phase that children formed their deepest bonds with caregivers. The text explained that these bonds were partially biological. Children would unconsciously sync their bioluminescent patterns with the patterns of those who cared for them. It created a form of nonverbal communication deeper than words. Once formed, these bonds lasted a lifetime and could not be broken without severe psychological damage to the child. Read this section 3 times, his heart sinking with each reading. Had he somehow bonded with Prince during those few minutes in his old cell? Was that why the Queen had not executed him yet? She was trying to figure out if killing him would harm her son. On the 21st day after the throne room incident, woke in darkness to a soft chirping sound. For a moment he thought he was dreaming. Then he heard it again, closer this time. He sat up slowly, reaching for the light control. Before he could activate it, a small figure climbed onto his bed. In the faint purple glow that never quite disappeared from the walls, saw Prince. The young prince's wing was healed now, only a faint line showing where the tear had been. His bioluminescent patterns pulsed gently in greeting. "You should not be here," whispered in. "If they find you here again, they will definitely kill me." Tilted his head and made a questioning chirp. Then, in halting, he spoke. "Why they hurt you, you help me." His breath caught. The prince could speak. He had not spoken in the throne room, so had assumed he was too young. But now, alone in the darkness, the child was talking to him. "I broke a rule," explained gently. "I touched you without permission. In your culture, that is very bad." "Rule stupid," said firmly. His patterns flashed orange for a moment, the color of disagreement. "You nice, you fix wing, you give water." He climbed closer, settling against the side like a cat seeking warmth. No one else nice, everyone busy, everyone scared. Felt his heart break a little. Here was a child, royalty, heir to an empire that spanned 12 star systems, and he was lonely. "What about your mother, the queen?" His patterns dimmed to almost nothing. "Mother sad, always sad, since Papa died. She look at me but not see me. See Papa." Carefully put an arm around the small prince. "She loves you. I could see that in the throne room. She was very worried about you." "Love not same as see," said wisely. Then he looked up at with those huge eyes. "You tell story about Earth." And so began a pattern that would continue for the next 2 weeks. Every few nights would somehow slip past whatever guards were supposed to be watching him and visits quarters. They would sit together and would tell stories about Earth. He described oceans that stretched beyond sight, mountains that touched clouds, animals of every size and shape. He told stories about human children who played in parks, who learned to ride bicycles, who laughed and sometimes cried. Was fascinated by the concept of play. Children not play, he explained during one visit. We study, we train, we prepare for duty. That sounds very serious, said carefully, but do not you ever want to just have fun, do something with no purpose except that it makes you happy? His patterns swirled in confusion. What is fun? Thought for a moment, then he stood up and grabbed one of the cushions from his sleeping area. Okay, watch this. He tossed the cushion in the air and caught it. Now you try. He handed the cushion to. The young prince held it awkwardly, looking at it like it might explode. Then, carefully, he tossed it upward. It went about 6 inches and landed on his head, made a surprised chirp. Then something amazing happened. Its bioluminescent patterns burst into bright yellow and gold, colors had never seen from him before. The prince made a sound that could only be described as a laugh. He picked up the cushion and threw it again, harder this time. It flew across the room and hit the wall. Looked at with wonder, again. Again, confirmed grinning. They played for an hour, throwing cushions, stacking data tablets into towers and knocking them down, playing a simple guessing game remembered from his childhood. Patterns stayed bright and warm the entire time. Shifting through colors was learning to read as happiness, excitement, contentment. When the prince finally left, slipping away through what now realized was a hidden panel in the wall, sat in his quarters and wondered what he had done. He was teaching the heir to the empire to play like a human child. He was encouraging behavior that society probably saw as undisciplined and chaotic. If anyone found out, it would be just more evidence that humans were corrupting influences. But when he remembered the pure joy in his patterns, the sound of his laughter, could not bring himself to regret it. Every child deserved to know happiness, regardless of what species they were. What did not know was that someone had found out. Queen Ara had known about the visits from the very first night. The hidden passages in the palace were not as secret as thought. There were surveillance crystals embedded in the walls, and the queen had access to all of them. She had watched every interaction between her son and the human prisoner. She watched tell stories with animated gestures, making his voice change for different characters. She watched him patiently explain games and help understand concepts that should have been foreign to a child. Most of all, she watched her son's bioluminescent patterns shine with colors she had not seen since before his father died. Physician had been right. The child showed no fear of the human. In fact, his patterns during these visits showed a bonding response normally reserved for parents and primary caregivers. The human had done nothing to manipulate this. He simply treated with kindness, patience, and genuine care, and responded like a flower opening to sunlight. Queen Ara had spent 3 weeks researching human culture through the diplomatic files. She learned about human families, human childhood, human education. She was disturbed by the chaos and lack of structure, but she also noticed something else. Human children who received warmth and play and individual attention grew into more creative, more adaptable adults than those raised in strict regimentation. The empire was old and strong, but it had not faced a true challenge in centuries. Perhaps it had become too rigid, too controlled. Perhaps a small dose of human chaos was exactly what the empire needed. Or perhaps she was simply a desperate mother watching her son come back to life and willing to grasp at any explanation that let her allow it to continue. On the 30th day, the queen made her decision. She sent word to Commander and the High Council. There would be a formal presentation ceremony. Prince would be introduced to candidates who could serve as his secondary guardian and mentor. It was time for the prince to have someone focused entirely on his education, and someone separate from the queen herself who had to rule an empire. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 days hence, was informed that he would be required to attend as part of his cultural education. He was given formal clothes to wear, taught the proper protocols for observing a royal ceremony, and warned that any disruption would result in his immediate execution. Agreed to everything. He was just happy he was still alive. He did not realize until much later that this was all a test, A test of him. A test of whether something new and unprecedented could work, or whether tradition would win as it always had before. The throne room was even more crowded for the ceremony than it had been for trial. Every noble house had sent representatives. The selection of a royal mentor was a great honor, and families competed fiercely for the position. Stood in a corner where he had been told to stand, trying to be invisible. One by one, candidates approached Prince, warriors who demonstrated combat skills, scholars who recited ancient texts, scientists who displayed inventions, artists who created beautiful illusions with light. Each one bowed low, offered gifts, and spoke about the honor of serving the prince. Sat on a small throne next to his mother, his posture perfect, his patterns carefully controlled. He accepted each gift politely. He listened to each speech, but his patterns stayed dim, barely showing any color at all. It was the equivalent of a child forcing himself to endure something boring. After the 20th candidate, Queen Ara leaned toward her son and spoke quietly. But the throne room's acoustics carried her words to everyone present. "My son, you have seen many fine candidates. Do you favor any of them, or do you have a choice of your own?" Stood, his small figure looked even smaller in the vast chamber. His patterns began to pulse, slowly at first, then faster. Colors started to appear, working through the spectrum until they settled on gold and blue, the colors of certainty and truth. Then Prince walked down the steps of the throne. He walked past all the distinguished candidates who waited hopefully. He walked across the polished floor until he stood in front of who had frozen in shock. The young prince looked up at him. His patterns blazed bright with colors that everyone in the room could read. Part 4, the word that changed everything. Time seemed to stop. Looked down at Prince standing before him, the young prince's bioluminescent patterns blazing so bright that they cast colored shadows on the crystal floor. Behind, hundreds of nobles stood frozen in shock. On the throne, Queen Ara remained perfectly still, her face showing nothing. Reached up and took's hand. His small fingers wrapped around larger ones with surprising strength. Then, in a voice that was amplified somehow throughout the entire throne room, the young prince spoke a single word. The word hung in the air like a bell that had been struck. The translation devices everyone wore stuttered, trying to find an equivalent and failing. The word was Korean, a human language, something that should not exist in this place. But its meaning was clear to the advanced translation systems. Parent, father, the one who protects and nurtures, the one who is chosen. Silence swept through the entire court. His mind went blank. He stared at, unable to process what had just happened. The prince had not just chosen him as a mentor or teacher. The word carried weight beyond simple instruction. In Korean culture, in human culture, it meant family. It meant belonging. It meant love. The silence shattered as Commander leaped forward, his armor chiming with the violence of his movement. "No," his voice was like thunder. "This is impossible. This is manipulation. The human has poisoned the prince's mind with his alien words and foreign concepts." Other voices joined his, a rising tide of protest and outrage. Nobles shouted over each other, their patterns flashing in aggressive reds and oranges. The careful order of the ceremony dissolved into chaos. The human must have used technology to control the prince. This is an insult to every who competed for the honor. How dare a prisoner, a specimen, presume to be chosen? Humans are too violent, too unstable to influence our future emperor. Through it all, did not let go of his hand. The young prince's patterns had changed now, showing streaks of purple that had learned meant determination, stubbornness. Turned to face the crowd, his small body positioning itself between and the angry nobles. Queen Ara stood. The movement was slow, deliberate, and it cut through the chaos like a blade. Every voice fell silent immediately. The queen descended from her throne and walked toward her son, and her patterns were impossible to read, shifting too fast for anyone to interpret. She stopped 3 feet away and looked at. "You," she said softly, though everyone could hear. "Did you teach my son this word, this human word?" His throat was dry. He forced himself to speak. "Yes, Your Majesty. When I told him stories about Earth, I used some Korean words. He asked what they meant. I explained that is what human children call their fathers, the people who care for them and protect them." "And did you tell him to call you this?" "No," said urgently. "Never. I would never presume." He stopped, trying to find the right words. "Your Majesty, I only told him stories. I played simple games with him because he seemed lonely. I never tried to replace you or his father. I never wanted any of this." "Then why?" the Queen asked, and for the first time heard emotion in her voice. Pain, confusion. "Why would my son, the heir to the Empire, choose to bond with a human prisoner?" Before could answer spoke. His voice was small but clear, and his patterns pulsed with absolute certainty. "Because he see me." The Queen's pattern stuttered to a stop. "What?" "Everyone look at Prince," said the words coming faster now. "See heir, see duty, see future emperor, but see child, see person." His patterns brightened again. "He asked what I want, not what I should want, what I want. No one else asked this." Felt his heart clench. He dropped to one knee, bringing himself to eye level. "Your Highness," he said gently then switched to Korean for the important part. "I am honored by your words, truly, but I am not worthy of such a title. I am a stranger to your world. I do not know your customs or your laws. You deserve a guardian who can teach you to be a great leader of your people, someone who understands what it means to rule an empire." His patterns flickered through several colors before settling on determined purple again. He responded in Korean, his pronunciation careful from hours of practice during their secret visits. "You teach me to care when someone hurt. You teach me that joy not weakness. You teach me that sometimes small action matters more than big power. These lessons for leader. These lessons from." Looked up at Queen Ara helplessly. The Queen's face had gone through several expressions during speech, ending on something that looked almost like wonder. Commander pushed forward through the crowd. "Your Majesty, you cannot allow this. The child is confused. He is in his luminescence phase and does not understand what he is doing. The human has taken advantage of his vulnerability." "Has he?" the Queen asked, not looking away from her son. "Physician, you are the expert on child development. Is my son being manipulated?" Stepped forward, her patterns showing the calm greens of medical objectivity. "I have been monitoring the prince's patterns during this entire ceremony, Your Majesty. What I see is genuine bonding behavior. The human is correct that Prince is in the critical luminescence phase. However, such bonds cannot be forced or faked. They form in response to authentic care and emotional connection." "So you are saying my son has truly bonded with this human?" "Yes, Your Majesty. The patterns do not lie. And may I add, the bond appears to be healthy. The prince's bioluminescence shows none of the distress markers we saw after his father died. In fact, his emotional balance is better than it has been in months." His patterns flared angry red. "This is madness. We are talking about the future of the Empire. The heir cannot be raised by a human. What will he learn? Chaos, violence, the inability to control himself." "He will learn compassion," said a new voice. An elderly stepped forward, her patterns so faint with age that they were almost invisible. Recognized her from his cultural studies as elder, one of the oldest living members of the council. "He will learn that strength comes in many forms. He will learn to see value in beings different from himself. Are these not also lessons for a leader?" "But he is human," protested. "Yes," Elder said calmly. "And perhaps that is precisely why the prince chose him. The Empire has been strong for 3,000 years because we adapt, we learn, we incorporate the best of what we encounter. The humans are young, yes. Chaotic, yes. But they have survived on a divided world where cooperation was difficult, where resources were scarce, where they had to innovate constantly just to survive. They have qualities we have forgotten in our comfort and order. You would risk the heir on a social experiment, demanded. I would trust the heir's own judgment, replied. Children in the luminescence phase have instincts for caregivers that are more reliable than adult logic. They bond with those who make them feel safe, seen, and valued. If Prince has found these qualities in the human, who are we to say he is wrong? Queen Ara held up a hand for silence. She knelt down before her son, looking directly into his eyes. When she spoke, her voice was soft enough that barely heard it, but the throne room's acoustics carried it anyway. My child, I have not been the mother you needed since your father died. I have been a queen, a ruler, a symbol, but not a mother. This human saw what I was too blind to see, that you needed someone to simply be present with you, to play with you, to value you for who you are, not what you will become. Her patterns shifted to colors had never seen before, complex combinations that even the translation device could not fully capture. I ask your forgiveness for my absence. His patterns exploded with bright yellows and pinks. He threw his small arms around his mother's neck. I love you, mother, but I also love, can I have both? The queen pulled back, looking at her son with shining eyes. Then she stood and turned to, of Earth. My son has chosen you, but I am not so naive as to simply hand him over to you. You will be tested. You will be watched. You will be judged every day. If you show any sign of using this position for gain, if you harm my son in any way, if you prove unworthy of his trust, I will not simply execute you. I will make sure you suffer in ways that human imagination cannot comprehend. Do you understand? Stood still holding his hand. I understand, your majesty, and I swear I will do everything in my power to be worthy of this honor. Then hear my decree, the queen announced, her voice once again filling the chamber. Will be given the title of cultural guardian to Prince. He will remain in the palace and participate in the prince's education alongside traditional tutors. He will teach my son about humanity, about Earth, and about perspectives that we may not consider. In exchange, he will learn our ways and serve as an ambassador between our peoples. Commander stepped forward one last time. Your Majesty, I must protest in the strongest. Noted, the queen said coldly. Your protest is noted and dismissed. The decree stands, unless, she paused, unless any here wish to formally challenge my judgment, to claim that I am unfit to make decisions regarding my own son. No one spoke. Challenging the queen directly was essentially treason. Even, for all his anger, was not willing to go that far. He bowed stiffly and stepped back, his patterns churning with suppressed rage. Queen Ara looked around the chamber. Let it be known throughout the empire. Change comes whether we welcome it or not. We can resist it and break, or we can adapt and grow stronger. I choose growth. I choose to trust my son's wisdom. And I choose to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, humanity has something to teach us after all. She placed her hand on his head in a gesture of blessing, then looked at one more time. Do not make me regret this decision, human. I will try my very best not to, your majesty, said, and meant every word. As the crowd dispersed, still murmuring in shock, looked up at with bright, happy patterns. Stay. Smiled, his eyes wet with tears he tried to hide. Yes, stays. Part 5. The Bridge Between Worlds. The first month was the hardest. Moved from his cell to proper quarters in the palace's eastern wing, rooms that overlooked a garden filled with plants that glowed softly in the twilight. He was given access to tutors who taught him history, law, and protocol at a pace that made his head spin. Every morning, he met with for lessons that combined human and educational methods. Every evening, he wrote reports about his observations, which were reviewed by the Queen's advisors. And every day, he felt dozens of hostile eyes watching him, waiting for him to fail. Commander was not the only one who disapproved of a human having influence over the air. Many nobles saw as a contamination of purity. They whispered that he was teaching the prince to be weak, undisciplined, chaotic. Some spread rumors that was a spy sent by Earth to manipulate the empire from within. Ignored them as best he could. He focused on. The young prince was brilliant, curious, and desperate for affection he had been for too long. They spent hours together, taught him about Earth's diverse cultures, its messy history, its art and music, taught about philosophy, their mathematical theories that made human science look primitive, their understanding of energy and consciousness. But more importantly, they played. They built structures with blocks had requested, telling stories about the imaginary people who lived in them. They drew pictures with light pens, creating terrible art that made them both laugh. They went to the gardens and observed insects, making up names and personalities for each one. Physician visited often, officially to monitor his health but really to observe the changes in him. The prince's patterns had stabilized into healthy, bright colors. He laughed frequently. He asked questions constantly. He was becoming a normal, happy child instead of a miniature adult carrying the weight of an empire. "You are good at this," told one day, watching chase flying creatures through the garden. "Being a parent." "I do not know what I am doing half the time," admitted. "I just try to remember what my own parents did, what made me feel safe and loved." "That is more than many parents do," said quietly. "We have become so focused on preparing our children for duty that we forget to let them be children first." Over time, something unexpected happened. Other palace workers began approaching with questions. A young tutor asked about human teaching methods that encouraged creativity. A gardener wanted to know about earth plants that might adapt to soil. A military officer, surprisingly, asked about human team-building exercises that fostered trust between soldiers. Slowly, carefully began to build relationships. Not everyone accepted him, but enough people did that he no longer felt completely alone. He shared ideas about medicine about agriculture with the gardeners, about education with the tutors. Some ideas worked, some did not. But the act of sharing, of collaborating across species, began to change the atmosphere in the palace. Earth's government, thrilled that their lost had somehow become an ambassador, sent official recognition of status. They established a proper communication channel. His family sent messages telling him they were proud, worried, confused, and desperate to know if he was really okay. He sent back messages assuring them he was fine, though he knew they would not believe it until they saw him again. 4 months after the ceremony, the attack came, and were in the garden during a formal procession through the capital city. It was meant to be a show of unity, with the queen, the prince, and his new guardian visible to the public. Thousands of lined the streets, their patterns creating a living light show. Did not see the attackers until it was too late. 3 figures in dark clothing appeared on a rooftop, weapons raised. The security team moved instantly, but human instincts were faster. He grabbed and pulled the prince behind him, shielding the small body with his own. The plasma burst his shoulder. The pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced, like being touched by a star. He screamed but did not let go of. Another burst grazed his leg. He fell, wrapping himself around the prince, determined that if he was going to die, at least he would die protecting the child who had called him. Then the world erupted in light. Patterns exploded outward, no longer the gentle glow of a child but a blinding radiance that pulsed with visible power. Felt something wash over him, through him. It was not physical. It was mental, emotional, pure psychic force. The attackers on the rooftop collapsed as if struck by lightning. So did several others hidden in the crowd. People had not even noticed. They all fell at exactly the same time, crying out and clutching their heads. Then started screaming, not in words, just pure distress. His patterns flickered wildly between colors, unstable and chaotic, pushed through his own pain and pulled the prince close, ignoring the burns on his body. "I am here," he said in Korean, the language that was just theirs. "Is here, you are safe, I am safe, we are both safe." Clung to him, his small body shaking. Gradually, the wild patterns began to slow. The psychic pressure in the air faded. By the time the security team reached them, was sobbing but no longer dangerous. was rushed to the medical wing. Physician worked on him for hours, treating burns that had gone deep into muscle tissue. He would live, she said, but he would have scars, permanent ones. Good, said through the pain medication making him dizzy. Scars mean I protected him. Scars mean I did my job. While he recovered, the investigation revealed the conspiracy. Commander and 15 other high-ranking nobles had planned the attack. It was meant to look like human terrorists trying to kill the prince, which would turn public opinion against Earth and justify its execution. But they had not counted on two things. First, that would literally take plasma burns meant for. Second, that the attack would trigger the emergence of latent psychic abilities. Psychic talent was rare among the, appearing in perhaps 1 in 10,000. It marked individuals as having exceptional potential. The fact that possessed it and that it had awakened to protect both himself and his human guardian was seen as a sign of what people argued about, but it was definitely a sign. Queen Ara personally oversaw the trials of the conspirators. They were stripped of their titles and exiled to distant colonies. Commander himself was given a choice: death or service in the Empire's most dangerous frontier zone for the rest of his life. He chose service, but his patterns showed the shame of his failure until the day he left. When was finally released from medical care, refused to leave his side. The young prince had been terrified he would lose another parent. He slept in his quarters, ate meals with him, insisted on accompanying him everywhere. Let him, understanding that the child needed reassurance. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset turn the sky colors Earth never had, spoke quietly. I hurt people, with my mind. I did not know I could do that. You protected us, corrected gently. That is different. What if I hurt someone by accident? What if I cannot control it? Thought carefully before answering. Then we will find teachers who can help you learn control. Having power is not bad. It is what you choose to do with power that matters. And I know you will choose to use it wisely because you have a good heart. How do you know? Because you ask that question. Because you worry about hurting others. People who will misuse power never ask themselves these questions. His pattern settled into calm blues. Will you help me while I learn? Always promised, that is what does. Years passed, grew from a small child into a young adult, guided by both his mother and. He learned tradition and human philosophy. He studied the Empire's ancient ways and Earth's messy, creative approaches. He became fluent in 7 languages, including Korean, which he spoke with when they wanted privacy. The palace changed too. His presence opened doors for other exchange programs. Human scientists came to study technology. Scholars visited Earth to understand human resilience and adaptability. Medicine advanced as both species shared knowledge. Art and music crossed species boundaries, creating new forms that neither humans nor could have developed alone. Not everyone was happy about these changes. There were protests. There were groups who wanted to return to the old ways. But slowly, gradually, the majority began to see benefits. Trade increased. Scientific discoveries accelerated. The empire, which had been stable but stagnant, began to grow in new directions. When Queen Ara eventually retired, passing the throne to her son, she did so knowing the empire was in good hands. Took the name Emperor the Bridge, honoring his role in connecting two civilizations. One of his first acts was to establish the Cultural Guardian Program, inviting representatives from dozens of species to serve as teachers and ambassadors. Another early act was to formally adopt into the royal family. It was unprecedented. It violated dozens of traditional protocols. It made genealogists cry in frustration. But it was also undeniably right. The ceremony was simple, with just the queen and a few close friends present. You have been my father in all ways that matter, said, using the formal language. Now let the empire recognize what my heart has always known. Now in his 50s with silver in his hair and visible scars from that day in the garden, accepted with tears streaming down his face. "I am honored beyond words, Your Majesty." "Not Your Majesty," corrected, switching to Korean. "Not today. Today I am just your son." 20 years after that, sat in the palace garden, the same one where he had first played with a lonely prince. He was old now, moving slowly, but still sharp in mind. He watched as own children played nearby, a new generation growing up in a universe that seemed impossible when had first arrived. Now emperor for a decade, came to sit beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, as they often did. "Do you ever regret it?" asked finally. "Staying here, you gave up everything on Earth, your career, your family, your whole life." Thought about it. He thought about his old apartment in Seoul, now owned by strangers. He thought about friends who had aged without him. He thought about Earth, which he had not seen in person in decades. Then he looked at the man who had been a scared, injured child when they met, at the emperor who now led with both strength and compassion, who valued innovation and tradition, who built bridges instead of walls. He looked at the children playing, human and together, not even questioning whether they should be friends. "No," said simply, "I do not regret it. I was a biologist studying alien life from a distance, but here I got to be part of something bigger. I got to be a father. I got to watch you become amazing. I got to see two species learn to understand each other. How could I regret any of that?" His patterns glowed with warm golds and pinks. "I never said it enough, but thank you. For seeing me when everyone else only saw a prince. For teaching me that kindness is not weakness. For showing the empire that different does not mean lesser." "You already thanked me," said, gesturing to the palace, the garden, the playing children. "Every day I see what you have built, the empire you lead with wisdom and compassion, the bridges you continue to build. That is all the thanks I need." They sat together as the sun set, a human and a father and son by choice rather than biology. And in that moment, thought about the day a small, scared creature had stumbled into his cell, and how one act of simple kindness had changed everything. Sometimes the most important moments in history start with the smallest gestures, a bandage made from torn clothing, a story told in the darkness, a word spoken from the heart. That single word had swept through an entire court and changed the future of two civilizations. And it had all started because a lonely child recognized something in a stranger from another world. Someone who would see him, truly see him, for exactly who he was. That thought was the real lesson, the one that mattered more than all the science and technology and political treaties in the galaxy. We are all, at our core, just looking for someone who sees us. And when we find that person, when we choose to protect and nurture them in return, we create bonds that can bridge any distance, overcome any difference, and build futures we never imagined possible. As the last light faded and the bioluminescent plants began their nightly glow, smiled. He had started this journey as a prisoner. He had ended it as a father, a guardian, a bridge between worlds, and he would not change a single moment of it. Even the scars were worth it.